Goal was to ensure soldiers viewed their bars as emergency rations rather than indulgent treats or trades. Ever wonder what people were chowing down on 200 years ago? Spoiler alert, it wasn't all tea and crumpets. Get ready to meet the dishes that time forgot, and probably for good reason. Here are some brutal lunches from those dark times. Number 20. Sheep Trotters. Sheep trotters are exactly what they sound like. Feet from a sheep.
You've taken me back home and this has been a delicious journey.
I'm glad I've taken you on that journey.
The Victorians liked to boil them at home when they couldn't afford other meat. If you were out and about though, these fried sheep's trotters would be served by pretty much every single food vendor out there, right alongside a ham sandwich. A bit chewy, a bit bony, but the Victorians thought they were delicious. Sheep trotters are the feet of the sheep, including the lower leg bones, skin, and tendons, but with the hoof removed. These parts are typically slow cooked to break down the tough connective tissues and cartilage, resulting in a gelatinous texture that can be quite off-putting to some. Well, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So you're either going to gain superpowers or need serious therapy after having these. Today, sheep trotters are much less common in mainstream Western cuisine, though they are still enjoyed in various parts of the world, including parts of the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. For those unfamiliar with the dish, sheep trotters can seem unappealing.
We have onion flakes, we have bay leaves, we have anise seeds. These are what we are starting with.
Due to their unusual texture, strong flavor, and appearance. However, for those who grew up eating them or who have developed a taste for offal, they can be a beloved or acquired delicacy. Number 19. Water Sushi. Now we know what you're thinking. What on earth is water sushi? Well, imagine if a fish had a really bad breakup and decided to cry in a pot of water. Water sushi is a fancy name for seafood water. To make water sushi, you go out fishing or look in your ice box and scrape together whatever seafood you can find. Throw it in a pot, boil it with a couple parsley roots, some old wine and vinegar if you have it, and voila! Water sushi. A lot of time, the soup ends up tasting a lot like mud, and a degree of caution was essential for consuming the dish, as the cooks rarely even boned the fish. There have been plenty of recipes in English food that have seemed so unappealing on paper, but have turned out good. This one certainly didn't sound good. A fish stew made from freshwater fish, a few basic vegetables, and water. Number 18. Brains. Whether it's a fast food restaurant or a backyard barbecue grill, or Wagyu patty served slathered in wasabi mayo, everyone loves a good burger. Some things don't change. If you are a Victorian housewife wanting to put on a bit of a do, you can make some brain cakes, burger-like fried meat patties made with brains. This recipe comes from Modern Cookery for Private Families by Eliza Acton, the most Victorian-sounding lady of her age. Wash and soak the brains well in cold water, and afterwards in hot. Free them from the skin and large fibers, and boil them in water slightly salted from 2 to 3 minutes. You then mash the brains with some seasonings and egg yolks and fry in butter. The recipe finishes by adding a teaspoon of flour and a little lemon grate are sometimes added. Yes, the lemon zest will make all the difference. Prion diseases are commonly cured by lemon. Every doctor knows that. Number 17. Rice milk. Rice milk? That sounds pretty normal, right? Oh, but this isn't your modern vanilla-flavored store-bought rice milk. This is the gritty, unsweetened, soul-crushing version your great-great-great-grandparents might have had when they ran out of literally every other food option. Rice milk, particularly the version made around 200 years ago, might not sound all that bad at first glance. However, when you dive into the specifics of how it was prepared and consumed back then, it starts to make more sense why someone might describe it as disgusting and brutal. Rice milk was made by boiling rice in skimmed milk. A cupful was served hot with a spoonful of sugar and a sprinkle of allspice. The dish resembled a very thin, watery rice pudding. Cheap to produce, it was often sold by female vendors from a metal basin over a charcoal fire. Once again, customers consumed the portion while standing in the street. If you were lucky, the vendor wiped off the spoon before you ate with it. The lack of any sweeteners or flavoring means that the rice milk would taste like a bland, starchy liquid. The flavor might be compared to lukewarm, slightly salty paste water, which isn't exactly appetizing. Number 16. Bloaters. A bloater was a salted herring, cold smoked whole. Head, eyeballs, guts, and all is seen in the famous Van Gogh painting as well. Hence the bloating. Vendors would impale the fish on a long fork and toast over a flame to cook it before selling to customers, who consume the whole gamey, soft, flabby thing. The name bloater comes from the fish's bloated appearance after smoking. That's traditionally one of the main reasons we gut an animal before preparing it, because the gases and fluids in their stomachs and organs can be both volatile and messy. The last thing most of us want when eating a fish is to see the contents of its digestive tract. They were typically eaten for breakfast or supper and were especially popular in coastal areas of England. If you were lucky, the fish had roe in its belly cavity. If you were really lucky, the fish fell off the fork. A stray cat stole it, and you didn't have to eat it. Number 15. Pressed duck. This is the dish for when you want to show off your culinary skills and also have a deep-seated need to take out your frustrations on poultry. The name pressed duck doesn't sound too awful at first, but when you get into the logistics of how this dish was prepared, it's quite morbid.
That is obviously blood, but it's not just blood. It's a mixture of blood, bone marrow.
The dish was popular enough that a chef actually invented a duck press to better make it. Before pressing the duck, it needed to be killed. The preferred method for butchery was strangulation, so that you didn't lose any of the blood. You let the carcass sit for a day so everything could settle, and then gut the bird, leaving its liver and heart intact. The duck was to be tossed in the oven on the highest setting for about 20 minutes at that point, so that the liver and heart would have broken down. This is where pressed duck gets morbid and weird. The freshly cooked duck was taken tableside and along with the press in front of the diners. The legs and breast meat were carefully removed, and then the carcass was put in the press and crushed. Imagine sitting down at a table dressed in your best, only to be served with a duck that was squashed right in front of you. Not your average Sunday lunch, right? The blood and marrow would drain out through a spout and collect in a bowl. A little bit of liver and stock would be added to the duck juice, and you'd have yourself a sauce. The duck was then served with the sauce poured over it. Number 14. Broxy. If Broxy kind of rhymed with pox, it's purely coincidental, or is it?
Doesn't make sense. I don't understand all the names that they add to it.
Meat was pretty expensive during the Victorian era, but besides beans and eggs, it was the most readily available protein. Poor families who couldn't afford better cuts of meat bought Broxy from the butcher instead. Broxy was a butcher's term for any kind of meat, usually sheep, that had dropped dead of disease. Since sheep carried lots of communicable diseases, including tetanus, salmonella, and ringworm, you'd probably drop dead too once you ate Broxy. About 200 years ago, when food preservation and availability were major challenges, Broxy was a reality for many poorer communities, particularly in rural areas. While it might sound horrific by today's standards, Broxy was sometimes eaten out of necessity, despite the obvious risks. The knowledge that the meat came from a diseased dead animal would be enough to turn most people's stomachs. Eating Broxy wasn't just a physical challenge, but a mental one, knowing the potential health risks involved. Number 13. Alligator Gumbo. Imagine it's 200 years ago. You're hungry.
Gumbo is one of them foods that's better tomorrow. Y'all know what I mean?
and the only thing standing between you and dinner is an alligator. For residents of Louisiana, this alligator was just another ingredient for their bizarre stew. Gumbo is a rich, hearty stew that originated in Louisiana and is a staple of Cajun cuisine. It typically contains a mix of meat or seafood, vegetables like okra, and is thickened with a roux or sometimes with file powder. Back in the day, people didn't have luxury items like grocery stores or, common sense. So, when they were hungry, they had to get creative. And by creative, we mean they looked at an alligator and thought, yep, let's eat that. But not just anyway. Let's throw it into a stew so thick it could double as glue and call it gumbo. A good gumbo always starts with a great roux, and it uses whole wheat flour as the base. This alligator gumbo recipe makes a serving for 10 to 15 people.
Here, we're gonna get our chicken stock. We're gonna start pouring it in here, letting it get hot.
All gumbo recipes are essentially built around the concept of slow cooking so that you can allow the flavors to merge and create that legendary flavor that you crave. Number 12. Saloop. Before coffee took over the world and tea became the classy way to caffeinate, people in England were sipping on this stuff. Saloop. Saloop was generally sold between midnight and 7 in the morning. It was a milky, soothing liquid. The Gorgarians believe it would settle the stomach after too many ales, cure hangovers in the morning, or set you up for the day ahead of a cheap, nutritious breakfast. Captain Cook also took it on his voyages to help sailors who became sick. And it was cheap. For tuppence, you could enjoy a bowl of Saloop with a slice of bread and butter. Henry Mayhew described it as popular among chimney sweeps and hackney cab drivers. The original Saloop, made from orchid tubers, had a thick, almost slimy consistency that could be off-putting. It was described as somewhat bland or earthy, with a texture that might remind modern drinkers of a thin porridge or even a medicinal tonic. The classic recipe involved grinding orchid tubers, mixing the powder to a paste, and adding milk and sugar. Yep, you heard right. Saloop was originally made from powdered orchid tubers. Because, when life gives you flowers, you drink them. And when those flowers ran out, they switched to powdered sassafras. Because why not add a hint of tree bark to your morning routine? Number 11. Sardines on toast. Sardines on toast is a simple dish consisting of sardines, usually canned or preserved, served on a slice of toasted bread. The sardines can be dressed up with various toppings like lemon juice, herbs, or even a spread of butter. There's nothing like the sound of sizzling sardines to really get the appetite going. Just imagine you're in a cozy, damp 19th century cottage.
And it's going to be another flavour as well as the leaf, but the flavour's really nice.
Where the only thing thicker than the fog outside is the smell of your dinner. Sardines having a naturally strong smell, which could be even more intense in the absence of modern packaging techniques. The combination of oily fish and possibly old bread could lead to a dish with a smell that some might find overwhelming or unappealing. Sardines on toast was likely a common meal among the working class due to its affordability. It might have been seen as a poor man's food, which could contribute to its perception as unappetizing by those of higher social standing who were unaccustomed to such food. While sardines on toast might have seemed a bit more brutal 200 years ago due to preservation methods and social context, it's far from disgusting by modern culinary standards. In fact, it's a nutritious, flavorful dish with a long history that's well worth trying, just maybe with some modern tweaks. Number 10. Jellied Eels. Well, jellied eels might not win any Instagram food awards, but they sure have character.
Summer kiosks and race courses, but there are only a handful of merchants who actually make them.
They're a testament to the British spirit of turning whatever the Thames could offer into something edible. Jellied eels originated on the East End of London during the Victorian era. The dish was made with chopped eels that were boiled in a stock. The whole mixture was allowed to cool, causing the fats to set and congeal into a jelly. It was served cold. These can still be found in some parts of London and are considered a delicacy by some. Eels were also imported from Holland, cut into pieces and boiled. The juices were thickened with flour and parsley, and the whole thing seasoned with pepper and kept hot for sale. A portion of the meat was served in a cup, the liquid separately. Customers could add vinegar if they choose. A scrap of butter cost extra. A customer had to eat his snack quickly since the vendor needed the cup returned. If you were lucky, the vendor would dip the cup in the bucket of dirty water before serving. Most of the time, he didn't bother. Number 9. Mock turtle soup. The idea of turtle soup may not be appealing to everyone.
And it's the ingredients are usually easier to come by too. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty cheap.
If for no other reason than turtle is not something we generally eat. So would mock turtle soup be better or worse? That comes down to what you think of how the Victorians made mock turtle. Mock turtle soup was created as a substitute for the highly prized turtle soup, which was made from the meat of green sea turtles. Since turtles were expensive and not always readily available, cooks devised a mock version using readily available ingredients that mimic the texture and flavor of turtle meat. The main ingredient? A calf's head. Yes, you heard that correctly. Calf's head. Never ones to be wasted, the Victorian cooks used anything they could find to make food. In the case of mock turtle soup, all you needed was a cow's head. According to one published recipe, you needed to scald the head until all the hair was gone, then boil it until the horns turned soft. At that point, you can cut it into slices the size of your finger.
Sorry. So that's one. I was looking at something else. That's two.
The remainder of the recipe was fairly standard, involving some stock, a lot of seasonings, a little Madeira wine, and then chopped brains. The brains were formed into balls, and you had mock turtle soup and brain balls, all made from a cow's head. Number 8. Pigeon Pie. Many people are a little shocked to hear about stuffed pigeon pies, because in the modern world, pigeons are widely regarded as little more than rats with wings, but 200 years ago, this dish was a staple of the upper and middle classes, often served at grand feast and special occasions. While it might seem disgusting and brutal by modern standards, especially for those who don't fancy the idea of eating pigeons, it was considered a delicacy in its time. Now, before you click away in terror, let's talk about what makes this dish so special. Picture this. It's the 1800s. You're a fancy noble with a hankering for something rich and gamey, but turtle soup is so last season.
Start by adding a half a cup of rolled oats to the sauteed onions and fat, along with a half teaspoon each of cayenne pepper.
What's the next best thing? Pigeon pie, of course. The more pigeons, the more merrier. The key ingredient, pigeons, were often plucked, cleaned, and jointed before being used in the pie. Sometimes the whole pigeon, bones and all, was baked into the pie. To make the pie more substantial, cooks would add hard-boiled eggs, bacon, or even beef suet. Sometimes vegetables like mushrooms, carrots, and peas were included, though the focus was definitely on the meat. While pigeon pie was enjoyed by many, it was often a dish associated with wealth and privilege. Just remember, if you ever find yourself at a historical reenactment and someone offers you pigeon pie, maybe stick with the bread and cheese. Today, pigeon pie is a rarity, more often found in historical reenactments or on the menus of restaurants specializing in traditional British cuisine.
Draping it over a standard 10-inch pie plate and trimming to size.
It's a reminder of how tastes have changed over the centuries and how dishes that were once considered luxurious can now seem odd or even unappetizing. Number 7. Stewed squirrel. First, you'll need one of these little critters. Now, before you start texting PETA, remember, 200 years ago, squirrels were basically fast food. You didn't have a drive-thru, you had a slingshot. So grab your squirrel, your veggies, and a pot big enough to fit this wonderland wonder. Settlers, mountain men, slaves, and others trying to survive on the American frontier ate any animal they could find, including squirrels, raccoon, skunk, pigeon, and porcupine. Squirrels provided a good alternative to chicken and was often served with dumplings. Settlers pan-fried squirrel and served it with gravy made from its juices, or they simply tossed the meat into a pot as part of a stew. Squirrel meat has a distinct gamey taste that can be strong and unfamiliar to those who haven't eaten wild game before. This flavor was appreciated by those who were used to it, but might be overwhelming for modern palates. The process of preparing squirrels for cooking, catching, skinning, and butchering them can be considered brutal by those unaccustomed to such hands-on food preparation. Unlike today's pre-packaged meats, this was a very direct and personal way to obtain food. Despite its disgusting and brutal aspects, stewed squirrel was a beloved dish for many people, especially in rural communities where hunting was a way of life. The meat was nutritious, and when prepared correctly, it could be quite flavorful. Number 6. Son of a gun stew. Back in the day when cowboys were out on the trail, they didn't exactly have the luxury of a 5-star menu. So, when it was time to eat, they made do with what they had, which, as you can see, was everything inside the cow.
12 ounces of frozen green beans, and then 12 ounces of frozen okra.
Meet your new best friends, Mr. Heart, Mr. Kidney, and Cousin Brain. Son of a gun stew is one of those old dishes that has a name as colorful as its history. While it might not sound like the most appetizing dish by today's standards, it was a hearty and practical meal that cowboy cooks threw together on the open range, especially during cattle drives. This food included a bit of everything. Cooks added browned cow or calf heart, liver, grains, intestines, and tongue to a pot with onion, salt, and pepper. One of the stew's distinguishing features was the inclusion of the marrow gut, or margot, the tube that connected the animal's two stomachs. Moreover, this dish became a common slang term for the hodgepodge meal served on the open plain and in military camps. Today, son of a gun stew might be considered an acquired taste, reserved for adventurous eaters.
It was hands down one of our favorite meals. My version is vegetable soup without the meat.
For those looking to connect with the culinary traditions of the American West. While offal has seen a resurgence in certain foodie circles, most people would probably pass on a stew made from such ingredients. Number 5. Slink Meat. This is one of those historical dishes that, by modern standards, would probably send most people running for the hills. The name itself hints at something unappetizing, and the reality doesn't disappoint. If you're looking for something truly disgusting and brutal, this dish might just fit the bill. If you have an affinity for leather, you may have heard of slink leather before. It's leather made from the skin of unborn calves. It's about as grisly as it sounds, and it's not the only use of slink out there. Along with Broxy meat, slink meat was another thing that you could find at a butcher shop if you were on a budget and couldn't afford the decent cuts. When cows had calves that didn't quite make it into this world, those calves became dinner. Yes, folks, this is not your grandma's pot roast.
As now, we're going to be cooking this at 2 different temperatures. For the dark meat, I'm going to be cooking at 167 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours.
This is slink veal, or as we like to call it, the meal you never wanted to know existed. If a cow was slaughtered for meat and it was found to be pregnant at the time, that unborn calf could be butchered and sold as meat. They would also sell the meat of miscarried cows or ones born prematurely. It's not legal to sell that kind of meat anymore, but for the Victorians it was a cost-effective alternative to regular cuts. Number 4. Hardtack. To an American, a biscuit is a soft, puffy dough bed upon which some satiny gravy can rest. To an Englishman, they are crunchy, sweet little buggers that are best dunked in tea before eating. To a Victorian-era seaman, they were a nightmare. Indestructibly hard, plain as all hell dull cakes. This nearly indestructible cracker was a staple for soldiers, sailors, and pioneers during the 18th and 19th century. While it was essential for survival during long voyages and military campaigns, its reputation as a tough, flavorless, and often downright revolting food has made it one of history's most infamous culinary relics. Now, if you're thinking, hey, just soak it in water, that'll fix it, think again. Soaking hardtack is like trying to soften up a brick by tossing it in the kiddie pool. You can wait all day and it'll still be as chewy as your grandma's old leather boot. But at least the seaman could expect a little extra protein from consuming ship's biscuits. The lack of modern storage technologies guaranteed weevil infestation. These bugs added some much-needed texture and a refreshingly bitter flavor on the otherwise dull biscuit. Or it convinced sailors that drowning might not be so bad. It took until the end of the 19th century for experts to work out a solution for such infestations.
Grind them up or powder them by putting them in a bag and beating them with a hammer.
The biscuit tin. Number 3. Fish head gumbo. Yummy. In the days before refrigeration and modern fishing methods, wasting any part of the catch was unthinkable. Fish heads, which are often discarded today, were seen as valuable ingredients, rich in flavor. Popular among Cajun communities in Texas and Louisiana, gumbo included the whole fish from head to tail. To prepare the gumbo, cooks tossed vegetable peelings and fish into a large pot and brought it to a boil. Once the fish's head and tail disintegrated, the concoction got strained with vegetables tossed in and a variety of seasonings added. This is where the disgusting and brutal part comes in for many people. Seeing fish heads floating in your dinner isn't something most modern diners would relish. The eyes staring back at you, the jagged teeth, these could definitely make the dish look more like a scene from a horror movie than a comforting stew.
Once you get the color right where you want it, we're going to add in those minced vegetables that we did earlier in our food processor.
What might make modern diners squirm was once a beloved and practical way to enjoy the full flavor of the sea. While it's a dish that might not appear on many menus today, it remains a fascinating part of culinary history, showing how different cultures have used every available resource to create something delicious. Number 2. Head cheese. Settlers never wasted any part of an animal, including the head. Despite the name, head cheese didn't have any dairy in it at all, but rather leftover animal flesh cooked, flavored, and molded into a cheese-like block. Many people still make head cheese today, though recipes vary. Some cooks boil or soak the head of a pig, cow, or sheep to loosen the nose, ears, and tongue. At times, feet and hearts get added to the mix. The remnants are strained, combined with spices and seasoning, and stuffed into the animal's stomach or some other mold. To make head cheese, the head of the animal is first thoroughly cleaned and then simmered for several hours.
Chilling it congeals and binds the other ingredients together.
As the meat cooks, it becomes tender and separates from the bones. The collagen in the bones and connective tissues turn into gelatin, which helps the meat mixture to set when cooled. The resulting product is sliced and eaten cold. This is where head cheese earns its disgusting reputation. The sight of a cold, jellied loaf with visible chunks of meat, fat, and perhaps even unidentifiable bits of pig's head can be unsettling. The idea of eating something made from a boiled-down animal head, complete with ears and snout, is certainly not for the squeamish. Number 1. Green turtle soup. Settlers consumed turtles in several ways, especially in parts of the country where the animals lived in abundance. Turtle eggs were supposedly available in the Plymouth colony, and turtle soup wasn't far behind. The meat from turtles fell into 7 categories, each of which resembled pork, chicken, beef, and some other common protein. The preparation of green turtle soup was labor-intensive and involved killing and butchering a large turtle. The meat, fat, and sometimes the cartilage of the turtle were all used.
Probably we'll add a little more stock to make it a little more soupy.
The meat was often boiled or stewed with herbs and spices, while the fatty, gelatinous parts were rendered into a rich, flavorful broth. Consumers found turtle meat so delicious that, according to one diner in 1900, it left a taste in the mouth that one wishes could be perpetual. The green sea turtle is now an endangered species, and the idea of hunting and killing one for food is abhorrent to most people today. The fact that such a majestic and ancient creature was killed for soup adds to the brutal aspect of the dish. The thick, gelatinous quality of the soup created by the turtle fat can be unappetizing to those not used to it. The sight of fatty, jelly-like broth might be enough to turn some stomachs. These were 20 of the most brutal lunches people had to consume 200 years ago. If you think we missed anything, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.